With the definitions and desires of American imperialism established, let's go ahead and venture into some of the first steps towards America's plan to impose their influence in areas outside of the continental United States. One of the very first places that America delves into will be that of what we now know to be Hawaii. Hawaii is rich in resources that are not traditional to the American continent. Um, there are products that are in more abundance naturally in the region of Hawaii, or the islands of Hawaii is what I should say, specifically sugar. And because of that, this will attract American businessmen. And for many decades, Americans and the British have been out to these islands, have conducted trade with the indigenous people of the islands. And over time, they've had to communicate and collaborate and do business with the local authorities as well. Eventually, there will be a leader of the islands by the name of Queen Lilua Kalani. Let's go ahead and underline her name. We can do that right here. Um, when she came to power, she made it very clear that she believed the Hawaiians should control Hawaiian resources for the best interest of the Hawaiian people and islands, and found it odd that these foreigners had so much influence, so much sway, when they were not really careful or had a clear understanding of the people and their culture. And that bothered her. So much so, again, that she argued that there should be this nationalization of resources, meaning that the people of the islands should control and curate the resources of the region. Of course, this is going to upset the businessmen, the American businessmen, who already have access to some of these resources, who have profited handsomely from these resources. They feel that their power will be threatened with her rhetoric, with her presence. And so they begin to figure out, well, how can we get this lady out of power? Of course, I'm making reference to American businessmen, and normally businessmen do not flex physically because that's not their business. They don't have armies. What they do have is a lot of money. And with that money, they can influence and purchase the type of power that they're ultimately trying to maintain. So it says here that a desperate minority of white businessmen will organize a successful revolt in 1893. You know, American businessmen will pay locals a fair amount of change in order to create this what it would appear to be this grassroots movement to overthrow the queen, when that really wasn't the case. It was very clear that money was the motivation, and ultimately the American businessmen had their way. And in doing so, they're going to establish a temporary government where an American businessman by the name of Sanford B. Dole will be placed as president. If that name happens to ring a bell, well, it should, because if we look at uh, the name Dole, you can practically see it on almost every can of fruit when you go to the local grocery store. And and if that's not imperialism, then I don't know what is. The idea that an American company or business can utilize their economic influence to overthrow a an indigenous seat of government for the sake of their own benefits, then I don't know what imperialism is then. And then on top of that, taking their resources, placing them in a can, slapping an American name and an American label on the front of it, and then selling it around the world as if it's theirs by right, but actually more so by might, and economic might translating into physical might. Um, we can see this is just the beginning, a taste of things to come regarding American imperialism. If you can tell, America is definitely expanding its influence um, to areas that are within slapping distance. And what I mean by that is, of course, Hawaii is in the Pacific, but America feels that it's close enough to where we could have some type of influence and control. If there ever was a place very close, within slapping distance, but outside of the jurisdiction of the United States, that would be Cuba. Cuba is about 90 miles away from mainland United States, around Florida. And Cuba currently at this time, we're looking at it right around, 1893, 1895. The Cuban people are under the colonial rule of Spain. And the Cuban people no longer want this. As a matter of fact, they want to be free. And the United States recognizes that they want to be free and are, they're not impressed per se, but at the very least they're flattered at the idea that these Cubans who are clamoring for independence are doing so in the vein of 1776, to the tune of the American fight for independence. And so, with that type of flattery, the American government will want to align themselves, at least in principle, with the Cuban revolutionaries, again, who are trying to seek independence. However, there could be some underlying economic influences at play as well, because if we can remove Spanish rule from the region, specifically that island, that nation, well, then that puts the United States at an advantage to fill in the spot, fill in the gap, and ultimately benefit with this proximity to the United States. So Congress will officially recognize the Cuban revolt against Spanish colonial rule. Of course, you got to know that this is going to upset the Spanish government. And there will be some bickering back and forth, some political posturing between Spain and the United States. But before we get to the actual conflict, which will be known as the Spanish-American War, I want you guys to underline something that's called yellow journalism. It's right here, and I'm going to underline it in red. But there are major media outlets, newspapers, that are controlled by media magnates by the name of William R. Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. If at the very least you've never heard of William R. Hearst, you should, or you might have heard of Joseph Pulitzer, specifically in reference to a prize recognizing the excellence of journalism known as the Pulitzer Prize. And that is true, it does exist, and it is named after him. However, when you look at the sentence that I have in front of us, it says William R. Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer wrote fabricated stories about Cuba. And when I say fabricated, that gives off the impression that they are made. They made up stories. The thing about stories is that they don't need to be made up if they happen to be the truth. You just simply report the truth. The fact that they're fabricating stories, it gives off the implication that the news has taken, I don't want to say creative license, but definitely an exaggerated license for the sake of selling a salacious news piece. And this shouldn't be too far-fetched, because we will be well aware of that in regards to our generational reporting. Sensational news akin to, like, I don't know, TMZ, OK Magazine, the National Enquirer, things of that nature. Back then, though, that type of journalism, it's hard to say that the American people understood it to be a type of sensationalized news, because more often than not, they had no reason to not believe the publications that were placed in front of them. And again, these stories you can make an argument that, if you're feeding the public these type of stories, it will get them to believe what they're reading. And if you describe the acts as atrocious, as vicious and vile, that could disgust the people, specifically the American people, in regards to the Spanish and how they are treating these Cuban revolutionaries. And it pretty much, these newspapers make the Spanish out to be the bad guys. Now, don't get me wrong; they most definitely could be those bad guys. However, it, with hindsight being 2020, the ability to look back and notice that some of these stories were fabricated, you have to ask yourself, well, why were they doing that? And granted, they were trying to sell newspapers. However, could there be a larger play in action that not only were they selling these newspapers, they were selling the war. And that by selling the war, that could benefit a war machine, if you will, or politicians or major American industries that would ultimately benefit from this conflict. Again, this type of journalism was known as yellow journalism, and today we could readily associate it with something along the lines of like a fake news, if you will. And so today, there's a skepticism amongst the American public to where we should read everything with a critical eye. Back then, the American people were not under a spell to distrust what was readily in front of them. But nonetheless, the fact that it was yellow journalism, by the way, the reason why it was called yellow journalism was because the newspaper, the magazine itself, was printed on yellow paper, and then that would be more attractive to the American eye. And that right then and there should probably kind of tell you how gullible people can be at times, that when passing a stack or a newsstand of newspapers, the simple fact that it was printed on yellow paper would more than likely attract us to pick it up and read it and buy it and believe it. Well, one specific example of yellow journalism succeeding will be when Hearst's Journal published a private letter written by a Spanish minister by the name of Dupuy de Lome. I want you to not necessarily underline Dupuy de Lome, but definitely underline de Lome. And I'm going to do that, well, not with that. I'm going to be able to do that here. And what I would like you guys to do is write out the word letter, because that's going to be the focus of this particular identification. The de Lome letter, again, was a private message that was meant for the King of Spain. And it was from the Spanish minister in Washington in 1898, who was explaining to the king that the American people, the American government, and specifically the American president, were out of touch with reality, had no clue on what was really going on in the world, and that if need be, these guys were slouches. We could definitely take care of the American military. The bottom line is this, regardless of the specifics of the actual letter itself, the attitude was, America's dumb. We can do what we want. Let's carry on. Well, this letter never makes it to the King of Spain. Instead, it will be published again in Hearst's Journal. The American people are going to read it. And when they do read it, they're definitely going to be upset. They're going to be bothered. They're going to be incensed. Now, is that a reason to go to war? No. But what this letter does accomplish is that it will sit in the mind of many that the Spanish are exactly who the Americans thought they were. Backstabbers, traitors. Traitors is probably a heavy word, but nonetheless, individuals that they were never probably going to like. And so, when I speak on wars in general, especially of the 20th century or close to the 20th century, starting with the Spanish-American War, I'm able to notice, or I was able to notice that there's two phases that tend to take place when America ultimately decides to go to war. Number one, phase one, is we need to get the American public to feel a certain way. That if in the American gut or in the American heart, Americans are feeling a certain way, that may lead us to war, but it definitely is not enough. We'll need another action to take place, and when those two items are combined, those usually are the ingredients for America to enter a conflict. So the DeLone letter, at the very least, satisfies phase one. It gets America to feel a certain way about the Spanish leading up to the Spanish-American War. What I would like for you guys to do now is underline, oh, I did it again, underline the USS Maine, but notice it doesn't say USS Maine here, so I'm just going to underline Maine, and then you guys can add USS to it. And this is an American ship. It's located in the port of Havana in Cuba, and we have been trading with the Cubans for quite some time. That's why we're there. You know, to have access to sugar, to have access to tobacco, you know, items that are not readily available in the United States. And in that very same year, where Americans are incensed about what they're reading in newspapers, specifically the DeLone letter, an American ship is going to explode out of nowhere. And Americans are going to be killed on that ship. And this, ladies and gentlemen, will be phase two. And that is the catastrophic loss of life. That if we can point to a specific moment where American lives are lost, coupled, I repeat, coupled with the American people feeling some type of way, those are the ingredients for us to enter a conflict. And in this specific regard, these are the two causes. The DeLone letter and the USS Maine will be the two causes for America to enter the Spanish-American War. By the way, hindsight being 2020, again, in roughly about 50 or 60 years or so, further investigation will reveal that the American ship that blew up, the USS Maine, it blew up because of a faulty boiler. Of course, in the papers, in the yellow journalistic papers, the belief or the attitude or the feeling was that it was the Spanish that had planted some type of explosive device on the ship, and ultimately will explode and lead to the death of many Americans. That was the feeling and the belief back then in 1898 when we decided to declare war against the Spanish, but and then of course later find out that that was incorrect. But that's neither here nor there. I mean, we're at war, so let's move on. Congress will declare war against Spain in 1898, and again, this will kickstart what is known as the Spanish-American War. Go ahead and write that out, and then underline it. Again, write out the Spanish-American War, and underline it. Now, when we kickstart this war, you can see from the second bullet, we don't attack Spain outright. Spain is a massive empire with positions all around the world, and now that we are vying for position all around the world, our Navy is able to attack the periphery of the Spanish Empire, and we don't attack them directly, not on their mainland, again, because that might also incur some type of collateral damage with that of Portugal, with that of Spain. I'm sorry, France. Who knows? Maybe even on the shores of England. So we don't attack them outright. What we do attack are some of their colonial holdings, specifically in the Philippines, and this won't take long. I mean, we knocked them out in the Philippines, destroying their 10-ship fleet in Manila. By the way, at the title of the slide, it says that President McKinley unleashes the dogs of war. The president at the time is William McKinley. Now, because we have victory in the Philippines, we want to secure that position So strategically, the United States is now going to annex Hawaii on July 7th, 1898. And again, this is for strategic reasons that we can use Hawaii as a launch pad, a gas station to maintain our position uh, all around the world, or not all around the world, but way around the world in the Philippines. Now, don't get me wrong, we've already had a presence in Hawaii, but those were for economic reasons, not necessarily for strategic reasons. But Hawaii will now be annexed to the United States in 1898. On July 1st, the United States will officially embark on an invasion of Cuba, um, and we will be successful there. So much so that we take a look over to the left, we take a look over to the right, and we see, hey, what's that? Well, that happens to be another Spanish holding called Puerto Rico. Oh, really? Yeah, oh, yeah, Puerto Rico. Well, right, let's take it. So in that very same year, General Nelson A. Miles will take over Puerto Rico. And before you know it, with American success in Puerto Rico and in Cuba and in the Philippines, Spain will sign an armistice, an agreement to put their weapons or their arms down in August 12th, 1898. Now, on this slide, it's simply a picture. It's a picture of Buffalo Soldiers in Cuba, and Buffalo Soldiers were a unit of African American fighters who signed up and were willing to contribute to the American war effort as a sign of allegiance to the country, allegiance to the principles that this country was founded upon, believing that securing the freedom of others uh, should be an endeavor that every American should support, regardless of color. And it's just another example that every single time America has been called to arms, every single conflict that the American people have been involved in, African Americans have served, have fought, have died um, in an effort to secure their own freedom, or at the very least prove that they have always wanted to partake in the full menu of liberties and freedoms that this country supposedly has to offer. And oddly enough, even during moments of discrimination, even during moments of degradation, we see that the African American community has never given up hope in what America could actually live up to. With the conclusion of the Spanish American War, McKinley will heed duty, destiny, and dollars. And what I mean by that is there was an American duty to assist the Cuban people and achieve their independence. However, in doing so, America will want to satisfy other elements of their desire, and that would be their so called destiny to manifest their influence and culture um, over any land that they might set their eyes upon and influence many countries with American dollars. And this is evidenced because we're going to claim Guam and Puerto Rico. We were supposed to liberate the Philippines. As a matter of fact, when we originally landed in the region, we were assisted by the indigenous Filipino people, and they were under the pretense that with our with our assistance, we would provide them resources to defeat the Spanish and ultimately earn their independence as well. And the moment at which they would earn their independence, we would leave. However, McKinley believed that it was our duty and our destiny to go ahead and stay in the Philippines because we needed to Christianize and civilize all of the Filipino people. And that to a degree is interesting. The notion that we have to Christianize a people who you should make I mean, an argument could be made that they're already Christian. I mean, this Spain has, in almost every instance, in regards to extending their empire, was also extending the Catholic Church. But that lends itself to the conflict that has always existed, as early as the colonization of the Americas, the conflict between the Catholic Church and the American Protestant Church, that we do not see Catholics as Christians, and that McKinley's argument is that, well, we need to show them the proper path of Christianity. And so we've decided to kind of go back on our word, stay in the Philippines, and in doing so, we felt like we kind of lied. So we agreed to give Spain $20 million so that way we could have access to the Philippines. And that is also kind of odd too. Why in the world would we fight a country, take a few of their holdings, but then give them $20 million for one specific area, such as the Philippines? I mean, the idea that we're paying for anything, it does kind of reek that maybe we were aware we do have a guilty conscience, or that we are aware that we were engaging in activities that were unbecoming of our initial expressed purpose, and that we felt we could absolve ourselves from that guilt with money, that we could buy our way out of our principles. And it's a bit unnerving to kind of see that and understand that, that we feel like we can soften things with money when our principles should have held up a bit better. Nonetheless, the Spanish-American War will only last 113 days. I mean, this is like the hot pocket of wars. America went in there quickly, handedly, took care of business, and it increased our prestige around the world, that we are now seen as a world power. The significance of this war, again, go ahead and underline the Spanish-American War, but it is significant because it marks the beginning of American imperialism. When you look at this political cartoon, you can see that Uncle Sam is standing right there in the center, looking lean, looking strong, and he's able to balance multiple territories that are symbolized by these, what look like, these almost ape-like, animal-like babies wearing diapers or underwear. And notice that they all look the same, but if you look closely at the flags that they're bearing, one says the Philippines, one says Puerto Rico, one says Cuba. And the idea behind that is that regardless of where exactly these people are, because Filipino people do not look like Cuban people, Puerto Ricans do not look like Filipino people, the people of Guam do not look like people from Hawaii, or maybe even Puerto Rico for that matter. But the point of the political cartoon is that it kind of gives off this impression that despite the fact that these individuals may not look alike, do not have the same culture, do not have the same traditions, do not have the same language, that they are all seen the same as these backwards, almost savage-like creatures that have to be controlled and taken care of by the benevolence or strength of the United States. And you can see that Uncle Sam is standing on a pedestal of his army and his navy, holding up his end at the very bottom of that political cartoon. And then the rest of the characters down at the bottom, they represent the other major players on the world scene. But notice that they're all looking up. They are in awe. They are now watching. The world is now watching America I don't know if I want to say in its prime, but definitely America on the verge of um, becoming what it will eventually be, the leader of the free world, a first rate power. But again, not always in the most honorable ways. Again, we look here, it says that we have new horizons in two hemispheres. That is an empire. As to whether or not if we should be one or why we are one, did we have to become one? Those are questions to consider with deeper reflection. But at this moment, America, by definition, is an empire. With that being said, there will always be trouble when you decide to have an empire. The Filipino people felt betrayed. They had fought off Spanish colonial rule only to now face a new occupying force in American rule. And for them, the conflict never ended. They simply just picked their weapons back up, and the enemy happened to look a bit different. The enemy happened to speak a different language, but nonetheless, the enemy was clear and present, occupying their land. An insurrection will be led by Emilio Aguinaldo. Please underline his name. As he led a revolt against American occupation of his homeland. His resistance will not last long. As you can see here, in 1901, he's captured and the rebellion will collapse. But we don't learn about individuals like Emilio Aguinaldo or Queen Liliuokalani because they fail. We learn about these individuals because they are evidence of resistance to American imperialism. And what I mean by, and granted, again, they're not successful, but that's not the point. The point is that we should always expect resistance when America happens to be outside of itself. And what I mean by that, we could say outside of our physical self, but it could be a lot deeper in that we are outside of the constitution of ourself, and not constitution big C, meaning like the document that defines our powers as a people, or the powers of our federal government was what I should say. But the constitution, meaning that the things that we define as building blocks to who we are, that if and when we find ourselves outside of that, we should expect resistance. For people to take a step back and look at us and wonder, like, what's going on? Whether that be from the American people themselves or from people around the world. Again, the Filipino insurrection will not be successful, but as long as America desires to be an empire, we will forever be in conflict, internally or externally. Now, shortly after the Spanish-American War, many countries had economic interest in China. The United States also wanted to be able to trade with China. China is this massive territory with resources known and maybe even unknown. So the possibilities seemed almost endless. But the problem is that China, for the most part, was a hermit of sorts. And what I mean by that is that they did not want to delve in worldly exploits or worldly affairs. They were content with what they had and what was going on. But it was the world knocking on their door that will ultimately lead to even further issues, um, especially when it comes to something known as the open door notes. Please underline, and I'm going to do it here, the open door notes. Now, our Secretary of State, John Hay, sent a statement of the open door notes to many countries around the world. And the open door notes are going to pretty much state that China's ports are to remain open, China is to remain independent, and no country is going to have special trading rights with China. And all of that sounds pretty legit. I mean, if you look at it from at face value, it sounds like that's exactly how things should be operating in China. I think if there's a question of well, what is the problem with the open door notes? The answer to that should be, why are we, the United States, dictating what, when, where, and how another country is to be? If that country had self-determination, shouldn't they be able to dictate as to whether or not, if they are to remain open, if they are to remain independent, if no country is going to have any trading rights with them? Shouldn't that be that people or that nation's jurisdiction? How is it, or why is it, that the United States feels compelled to issue such a statement or have such policies? And here's the kicker. Everybody gets a copy of these so-called policies except China themselves. That America is kind of telling the world, hey, yo, this is how things are going to happen, or this is what's going to happen regarding this country, and everybody needs to ante up and oblige. And everybody will. Because I'm not sure if these other European countries or these world powers wanted to test whether or not, if America was willing to back up or enforce their desires or designs for China. So with the open door notes, the rest of the world is waiting. They're expecting America to also follow suit with their so-called policies. But in reality, that's going to be the exact opposite. In reality, when we look at this political cartoon, we can see here that Uncle Sam is standing in front of the gates of China, holding the key. And many European countries are on the outside looking in, waiting to get a pass, waiting to get into the club. But again, only at the discretion of who? The United States. And if that's not evidence of imperialism, then I don't know what is. I mean, imagine if a country like, let's say, Mexico, the president of Mexico says, issues a statement letting every American know that marijuana is legal in the United States. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mexican president. We appreciate your enthusiasm. However, you have no jurisdiction over here, man. You're not going to be able to tell the American government what they're going to do or the American people what they can do. I mean, hell, the American people barely listen to their own government or follow their own laws. You can't tell Texans what to do. So the audacity at times of America is interesting, considering, and let's be honest, we've only been a nation for about 100 years or so. And we're already in position to start telling many world powers that have been around for centuries. You want to talk about history books. Their history books, should have volumes of information and stories to cover. Whereas America's been around for about 100 years, and it seems like we're already calling the shots. The open door notes, ladies and gentlemen, are significant because they are evidence of American imperialism. And as I've stressed before, anytime America desires to be an imperialistic power, threat, or entity, we will face resistance. And we can see this even in China. In 1900, a secret society in China started a rebellion. They were protesting the influence of Western countries in China. This would be known as the Boxer Rebellion. Please underline the Boxer Rebellion. It was called the Boxer Rebellion because the resistance were fighting with fist and foot. And from the Western perspective, we've never seen anything like that. This guy, did he just try to jump kick me? So we blow him away with the gunshot. And from our perspective, we had never seen anything like that. We have no knowledge of what kung fu is, but what we do know is that when people are fighting with fists, we tend to refer to that as pugilism or boxing in general. But because they were Chinese and they were what appeared to be boxing us, we refer to that as Chinese boxing. And Chinese boxing, ladies and gentlemen, practically is kung fu. But again, we don't know that, and we're not going to call it that because we're looking at it from our perspective, and we call it as such. And so now we have this Boxer Rebellion, and again, it too will be short-lived. It too will not succeed. But nonetheless, it's evidence of resistance against American imperialism, and this won't be the first. This won't be the last. The examples that I've provided you have all failed, but that won't always be the case. It's a matter of time, again, as I've already stated, that if America desires to continue as an imperialistic power, we will meet resistance, and there will be an instance in which that resistance will succeed. If we make it to the Vietnam War, if we make it to Afghanistan, we can delve a bit deeper into understanding how or why that type of success was possible. Outside of that, that's the end of the chapter.